This woman liked working with babies to satisfy her twisted desires for torture, to make them suffer. She did it over and over again with various little ones from different families until one day she went too far and handed over the lifeless 2-month-old Benson. But the most disturbing thing was when she gave him to his mother as if he were asleep in his carrier crib. He was covered almost from head to toe with a blanket, apparently to counteract the cold. However, it was just a way to hide that the child no longer had vital signs. As soon as his mother realized, she called 911 and tried to give him first aid, but it was already too late. Benson's mother and aunt tried tirelessly to revive him. They had no idea why such a tragedy had occurred, let alone unknowingly, they had hired a nanny who already had quite questionable records. Her name was Marissa Tietsort, whose past with other infants cost her her caregiver's license. Somehow she had managed to gain the trust to take care of 2 other minors, and the result was the death of one of them. No stage in this woman's life had taught her to love and care for babies. On the contrary, all her experience translated into pain and abuse, even from childhood. Unfortunately, she never knew the warmth of a family, so when she became an adult, she only had suffering to offer. Born in Wisconsin, in the United States, Marissa knew from a very young age the evil that inhabited this world. From inside her home, she could see in a very derogatory way the aggressive manner in which her parents treated each other. She and her sister could never perceive that feeling of relief and protection when falling into their mother's arms. On the contrary, they wandered through the corridors of their house completely neglected in a hostile environment where their parents ignored their primary needs until suddenly the man decided to leave home, leaving his family behind, unconcerned and ready to never look back at the past. Since then, Maritza's mother became the only support of the household, going through dozens of different jobs, which were never enough for an acceptable quality of life. The memories of that lacking time then remained imprinted in the memory of the girls and the woman who, unable to hold a position in the same job, suddenly thought that the solution was to find a new partner. That's how she met the man with whom she decided to share her life, but not only hers but her daughter's as well. It seemed that finally that season of comings and goings, of uncertainty about whether today they could bring food to their mouth or if they would spend another day without eating, was about to end. It was supposed that with their mother's new love, they would now have a roof to sleep under and economic stability. But the reality was far from that idyllic world they had formed in their mind. This man was much worse than their biological father. He had an aggressive personality, was abusive and also violent. In a rather unfortunate irony, it was as if they had left chaos to enter hell itself. Even worse when he introduced the mother to illegal substances, once again subjected to a completely dysfunctional kind of family. Neglected and at the mercy of a woman whose most of the time was under the effects of hallucinogens. These girls had nowhere to go. No one else looked after their safety, and therefore their stepfather did not fear the consequences of his actions, sadistic and sick at the same time. He was an intimate abuser. He had his stepdaughters at his disposal as much as he wanted. The intimate outrages against the girl were not exactly a secret in the house. Her mother knew it. However, instead of doing something about it, she decided alone for her partner until even she herself took advantage of Maritza, since due to her uncontrollable addiction, she suddenly found herself in the middle of an almost unpayable debt. So she found a solution by selling her own daughter's body. Little by little, these attacks were distorting her mind, leading her down the path of drugs, which soon became the only way to survive, just like her mother, escaping from reality. As a result, this woman Maritza grew up with a cognitive deficit that limited the speed at which she learned new things. In addition, the passage of time left her with a deeply ingrained malevolent personality and lack of empathy. She thought of little children as harmless beings, incapable of countering her contemptuous ways of treating them. She perhaps thought that they would find a way to vent all the suffering she had been carrying since her childhood. So, contrary to all predictions, she suddenly started to take on some jobs as a nanny. She was definitely not a capable woman, but a smile on her face and words of love towards the babies gave enough confidence to the parents to leave their children under her care. The truth was that the woman did not have the ability to take care of her own children, as no one had any idea that she was the mother of 6 children, some from different fathers, whose custody she had lost due to her negligence and of course due to her substance abuse. Unfortunately, dozens of children would pass through her rough hands before she was denied her right to work as a caregiver, and worse still, before a life was taken due to her deficient work. Once she was seated in front of the investigators in charge of the case, she dared to say more than once that she was not capable of harming any child. Undoubtedly, what she was looking for was to disassociate herself from all responsibility. But the truth behind her false words painted a much harsher picture, even dating back several years. It is likely that much earlier, but the first data of her abuse towards minors came to light in 2010. At that time, she allegedly had a partner with whom she shared 2 children who were both in their care and who in fact made the first complaint against the woman, asserting her mistreatment, lack of responsibility, and the clear abuse she perpetuated against them. And that's why the case ended with a restraining order and the removal of legal custody of the 2 children, also opening the possibility that her other children could be taken away as well. It all happened around the year 2017 when some unfortunate parents had the bad luck of entrusting their baby to this sadistic nanny. He was just 3 months old and in his innocence spent a few hours under the care of someone who was supposed to keep him safe, feed him, play with him. However, it is still unknown what exactly happened. But when returned to his parents, the little one had a blow to the head so strong that it had seriously damaged his skull. This incident perhaps should have been more than enough to never entrust her with a minor again, but defying all odds, the woman was hired again in October 2018 to take care of an 11-month-old baby. Events happened on the 11th day. The little girl was supposed to be safe with her babysitter while her parents took care of all their pending tasks before reuniting with her. Everything was going well until Marissa sent a text message to the parents, which contained information that seemed not very important, as according to her, the little girl had accidentally fallen off the couch. However, the situation was momentarily under control without escalating. Even so, the mother of the child decided to return home. She wanted to make sure her baby didn't need medical attention. And when she opened the door to her home, she found the babysitter with a smile on her face and the baby in her arms. The first glance at the situation showed exactly what the caregiver had said in the text message. Everything is fine, especially noticing her lack of concern for the little one. However, once she left the door, the mother noticed her daughter acting a bit strange and immediately headed to the hospital. There, the child was examined from head to toe, and what the doctors discovered was horribly chilling. Indeed, she had wounds on her skin, but they were not consistent with those from a fall from the sofa. On the contrary, everything indicated that they had been inflicted by someone else. After the event then, justice was very clear with the accused. An order was issued against her in which she was emphatically denied her right to continue earning a living as a nanny. It even had a clause where she is strictly prohibited from being near any minor. Just a few weeks after being notified by the authorities with the restraining order related to minors, Marissa struck again. All this tragedy took place after Benson's mother had decided to trust this woman. Apparently, she was a known person in her circle of friends, but no one had any idea of the truly evil personality she had. In fact, Heather, the mother of the victim, was completely unaware of this witch's background. This was the big mistake that would cost her the life of one of her children. That morning, little Benson left his home with his mother and older brother. The plan was for both of them to spend the afternoon with the caregiver while Heather went to her usual workday. When she handed the children over, she asked her to please take them to a laundromat in Wisconsin at the end of the day where she and her sister Jessie would be waiting. The caregiver happily agreed. They were giving her freedom, and then the woman said goodbye to her children. Afterwards, the day went by in absolute normality. However, Heather suddenly began to receive strange messages from the nanny. The truth was that Marissa did not have a clear conscience. She knew that by taking care of those minors, she was going against the orders of justice and even committing a crime, but for some reason she thought she could get past that perception. However, something began to work against her. Her face was already circulating through different media outlets accused of child abuse, so fearing that the biological mother of the children would find out and decide to come back for them much sooner, she thought it would be a good idea to be the one to notify her. Thus, she sent her a text message giving her a kind of explanation that she might suddenly come across such alarming news, but that was no reason to worry that her children were in perfect condition under her care. In addition to this, she asked her with quiet desperation not to report her to the authorities, as this could have consequences, reaffirming, of course, that the children were safe. Thus, under these developments, the day passed until the woman finished her work shift. As she had agreed with the nanny, she was about to head to the laundromat where Jessie would also meet to wash the clothes, just as they had planned. The idea was to meet at this place, see the children, finish washing, and then go home to enjoy some hot food. The freezing weather warranted it. But the plans obviously did not go as they expected. They had ahead of them the worst nightmare they could ever have imagined. Once there, Jessie was also a witness, so he saw how the caregiver handed over the little ones, apparently safe and sound. The older one was intact and the baby was asleep in his carrier crib. He was wearing a little suit ideal for covering him from the snow and a little hat that barely left his face uncovered. Everything seemed, in quotes, normal, considering the freezing weather that chilled them to the bone. So the mom thanked the babysitter and she left with a smile on her face. But well, incredibly, she already had knowledge of the child's condition. He was lifeless, but almost as if he was mocking the situation, he left the laundry in a very good mood. In this way, once the washing and drying tasks were completed, the women took their things and headed to their car. Before turning it on, they realized something terrible, and that is that Benson was extremely cold and motionless. It was then that they went back to the laundry to lay him on a table and made the call to 911. They barely managed to give the correct address of the place, as Heather especially was completely distraught, not knowing how to proceed with her unconscious baby's body. On one hand, there were the instructions from the authorities to perform cardiopulmonary resuscitation, while on the other, the eldest son, not understanding what was happening, began to cry inconsolably. It was a distressing and heartbreaking scene. In the images, you can see Heather and Jessie tirelessly trying to resuscitate little Benson, naively thinking that his body could still respond to the stimuli of cardiopulmonary resuscitation. They didn't know at that moment that the time of his death had occurred much earlier. There was no longer any chance to resuscitate him or bring him back to life. In this way, the women stayed on the phone until police officers arrived at the scene only to confirm the little one's death. The paramedics couldn't do anything. At that moment, no one had any idea what had happened. They attributed the death to sudden death or something related to natural causes. However, when the name Marissa came up in the conversation between the police and the two women, the case took a rather disturbing turn. As the police well knew, this woman was strictly forbidden from approaching minors. Thus, she immediately became the main suspect, and the order for her search was deployed at that moment. It was known that she was with her current partner, who was Adam, and apparently both were at home. That was the first place where the officers met, but there was no one there. Although finding their whereabouts was not complicated at all, thanks to a person who worked in the building, as one of their phones was easily tracked. Marissa and Adam were staying at a nearby hotel. Adam was aware that his partner had legal issues, but he was completely unaware of the fact that the child who had been handed over today was lifeless or that she had taken his life. So he had no choice but to wake her up so she could be interviewed by the police, to whom she said very calmly she was just watching him and he was fine. A quite controversial response, given that she had not yet been given all the necessary information to respond in the way she had. Without a doubt, the woman was hiding something. Marissa gave some hints of what they did that day, omitting a small detail, the fact that when they were doing activities, such as going out to eat, the child had already died, and she knew it. Naturally, they took her into custody to give way to the formal interrogation and the start of the investigation, in which a glimpse of what really happened could soon be given. But the worst discovery was made through a video from a security camera located inside the fast food restaurant called McDonald's. There was little time left for the agreed time between the caregiver and the baby's mother, so the woman took the opportunity to go enjoy a hamburger with her partner. In the file, you can see how she holds in her hands the carrier crib in which Benson apparently is sleeping. No one notices at that moment, but it is a woman who is looking in the most derogatory way possible to prove that the child was still alive while he was with her, or at least that might seem, given that she had him very well wrapped in a quilt almost covered up to the head. That little corpse had begun its decomposition from approximately 4 in the afternoon after his nanny slammed him to the ground, causing him 3 injuries to the skull and coccyx, which according to the words of the forensic Robert Corliss was fractured, broken and displaced, being this an indication that significant force had been used. Marissa had already had previous conversations and other interrogations in which she assured that she had no idea how what happened could have taken place. So in this new interview, the investigators could confront her with the results of the autopsy that fortunately had already arrived, but that unfortunately told the terrible suffering to which this woman had subjected the baby. Her stance affirming her innocence seemed that it would not change under any circumstances. However, the investigator chose to touch the woman's emotional fibers in case she had any, of course. She began by telling her that the mother of that child had the right to know the truth, that perhaps it had been an accident, and that this was her only chance to show that she was not a monster, just as the media described her. In this way, little by little, Maritza's face began to turn red, and the possibility of telling the truth began to show in her, not without first crying non-stop, then remaining silent for a long period of time until her version of "I did nothing" began to transform into a "possibly." And this was what the investigators needed, her confession. The sick desire to harm children was deeply rooted, deep within her. She couldn't even take care of her own children without hurting them. Curiously, she had many, and even worse, at the time of the interrogation, Marissa was expecting another baby. Fortunately, this was finally the last attack of the killer Nanny, as after being declared the only suspect in the homicide, she was formally accused before the justice system and then sentenced to 43 years in prison and 23 more years on parole. On several occasions, this woman has also apologized to the relatives of the children she may have hurt, but she does so from her comfortable role as a victim, claiming that her behavior is due to substance abuse and a long history of abuse that she has carried since she was a child living with her mother. And if you like topics about the paranormal, crimes, mysterious things, this is free. You can find it on the Muchos Más Misterios channel. It's the podcast I do with my partner Edson. Thank you.